What about the people who were alive during his lifetime, and the people who believed in him? What did they debate about? Did they debate what we are debating right now? Did they debate whether Jesus was God or just a prophet? Well, guess what? These guys used to debate on whether Jesus was the Messiah or the prophet of Deuteronomy 18:18. That's what they used to debate with each other. And here is the reference from John chapter 7, verses 40 to 41. Let me read it for you. When some of the people heard his words, they said, "This man must be a prophet, the one we've been expecting." Others said, "He is the Christ." Still, others asked, "How can the Christ come from Galilee?" Notice, these guys were even debating each other and putting rebuttals to each other. How can he be the Christ? He's from Galilee. And the other said, "He is the prophet we've been expecting." And that is the prophet of Deuteronomy 18:18. So why in the world are we debating whether Jesus is God or not, when his own followers didn't debate such things, but rather they debated if he was the Messiah or the prophet of Deuteronomy 18:18. Now, isn't that interesting? In the supposed most Christological gospel out of them all, John, you have a bunch of people debating whether he is the prophet or the Christ. Now, if that's not interesting, I don't know what is. And that's straight from the gospel. Now, since I have time, I'll continue to other points. Now, here we are tonight. Here we are, all of us sitting here debating whether Jesus is God. But think about this. What an irony. The man who we're debating, who is supposedly God, he himself has a God. How in the world is Jesus God when he himself has a God he cried and prayed to? Let's just look at the Gospels and take what we see. And let's leave the Trinitarian interpretation at the window. I'm just going to tell you the facts that are from the Gospels. And here are the facts, my friends. Jesus has a God. Jesus prayed to God. Jesus ate. Jesus slept. Jesus was not all-knowing. Jesus died. Now put all of that together. Put all of this together. Do you really believe that Jesus is God? Put all the fancy interpretation to the side and just take the text and take what it's telling you. Everything I just mentioned. If you were alive during Jesus' lifetime, my friends, let's say you were one of his disciples and you were beside him and you saw him praying and crying to God, would you really take this man as your God, the one you pray to? Would you do such a thing? Honestly, ask yourself that question. But again, I'm sure the Christians will be disagreeing with me, specifically the Trinitarians. But remember, I've put the challenge down. Show me a single verse where Jesus says, "I am fully God and fully man. I am the God-man." Because that's your interpretation to all these problems I just brought up. Now, if you can't bring this verse as clearly as I just asked, then nobody should listen to you or any other Trinitarian and should simply conclude with the obvious fact that this man who never claimed to be God was not God. That this man prayed to God because he was just a man like all of us. Now anyway, I've disconnected from Paltalk, but I'm still on Skype, and I have a minute left. Let me end on a final point on the Trinity. As Kabane said, there's three persons. But now I have a question for all of you and for Kabane. Is Jesus the Father? Obviously he's not. Is Jesus the Father, and is the Father Jesus, and is both of them the Holy Spirit? The answer is no. Each one of these persons are different persons. Jesus is not the Father. The Father is not Jesus, and the Holy Spirit is neither. So therefore, you have three actual persons, none of them are each other, and each is fully God, according to Thomas. So how many gods are you left with? So in fact, here's a third challenge for you. Bring me a single verse from the four Gospels where Jesus said, God is one in three, or God is made up of three persons. Because last I checked, in the Gospel of Mark, when somebody came up to Jesus, what did Jesus say? There is only one God.
Alright, thank you for that, Mr. Zaatari. Now let's deal with these statements that you made. The first thing I want to do is I want to address your objection about the Holy Trinity. You said that there are three distinct persons. How can they be one God? They are one God because the Son is eternally begotten of the Father and eternally partakes of the Father's essence, and that is why He is God. And the Holy Spirit eternally proceeds from the Father and partakes of the Father's essence, and that is why He is God. It is because the Spirit and the Son eternally partake of the essence of the Father that they are deity. Okay, because they are one in being but three in personhood. This does not mean that there are three gods. To say that there are three gods would mean that there are three beings, but there are three persons, one being. So you simply, again, you misunderstand the doctrine of the Trinity. You don't understand the relationships between the persons of the Trinity. Now let's address your challenge. You said, if Jesus is God, one would readily expect to find a single passage which quotes Jesus as saying, I am God. We must have this, or we know that Jesus is not God. Well, Mr. Zaatari, Theos, the Greek for God, is not the only title that God uses. You remember in my opening statement, I stated that wisdom of God is clearly a title for God because Yahweh is called divine wisdom in the Old Testament. So the question, does Jesus explicitly call himself a title of God, wisdom of God? The answer has been given in my opening statement, Luke 11:49. Therefore also the wisdom of God said, I will send them prophets and apostles, some of whom they will kill and persecute. So yes, Jesus does say quite explicitly, I am God, because he uses the divine title, wisdom of Theos, which is clearly a divine title as proved in the Old Testament. And remember, wisdom is equated to Logos, and so what is Logos called in the Old Testament? It's called Yahweh. Genesis 15:2 calls the word, O Yahweh. So this is simple. Jesus does claim to be divine because he uses divine titles of himself. Wisdom is a divine title. Jesus says, I am wisdom, and therefore he does claim explicitly to be God. Again, your next challenge. Show me a passage where Jesus claims to be both God and man. This is a ridiculous challenge. If Jesus claims to be a man in the New Testament, then he's a man, and if he claims to be God in the New Testament, then he's God, and if he claims to be both in the New Testament, then he's the God-man. And it's obvious, and the Muslims will admit that Jesus claimed in the New Testament to be man, and the Christians argue that Jesus claimed to be God, and I have proven this, and he does. So therefore, Jesus is the God-man from the New Testament itself. Now, Mr. Zaatari next said that Jesus not being all-knowing proves that Jesus was not God. Now, I would like to challenge Mr. Zaatari to provide the verse where Jesus is not all-knowing, and I know precisely the verse he's going to provide, so just provide that, and I will respond to this in my next rebuttal. You say, Jesus' death proves he's not God. Well, this is simple. Only Jesus' human nature died. Jesus' divine nature never ceased to exist. So you simply, again, misunderstand the doctrine of the hypostatic union. You say that saying Jesus is fully God and fully man is useless because they are contradictory, but you misunderstand this. It would be contradictory if we said the divine nature was human, because of course the human nature of Jesus is limited and the divine nature is unlimited, but we are not saying that the divine nature of Jesus is human. We are saying that they are distinct natures that are united in one person, and that sometimes Jesus accesses only his human nature, and sometimes he accesses his divine nature. So they are a union of natures, they are not a meshing of natures. Your point would only be valid if it was a meshing of natures rather than a union of natures. You say, what about the people who were alive during Jesus' lifetime? Did they debate what we were debating? Did they say Jesus was God? Well, they said Jesus was a prophet. They said he was the Messiah. And I affirm that Jesus was a prophet and the Messiah. I remember the threefold office. Jesus is prophet, priest, king. I affirm Jesus is the prophet. Jesus is the Messiah. So this is not a point against us. And what did the people in Jesus' time say? I asked nobody IM me during this. That's kind of annoying. So what did the people in Jesus' time say Jesus was? Well, all we have to do is go to John chapter 20, verse 28. Thomas answered him. He is speaking to Jesus. My Lord, my God. So we do see the closest people to Jesus, the apostles, not just followers who had heard of him, but the people who knew him through his entire ministry, said,